TikTok. Hello. Welcome to the Story in Life podcast with Mr. Barrett and Mr. McCreary. We've stopped using
David.
We've stopped using David and Dale because David thought it just wasn't quite proper enough. Anyways, in the podcast for today, we're going to look at what we probably consider to be the most important question, the most important topic of all of the topics that we've discussed to date.
I think idea.
The most important idea, or the most significant in our lives, which, needless to say, can make us a little hesitant approaching the subject because we aren't sure how to do it justice.
Big build-up.
Yeah. It deserves a big build-up. I mean, in some respects, this is the idea that is fundamental to our understanding of what it means to be Christian, what it means to be human, why we do what we do. What else?
How we live together, how we treat people, and why that matters.
Yeah. So, to begin this, I'm going to tell, I guess, a couple short little stories. One of my friends posted a blog in which he told a short story about a man who was having problems with the neighbor kids knocking over his garbage cans. And, every couple days he put out his garbage, and next thing you'd know, he'd hear the can clatter and garbage spill all over the place, and he'd run outside, and there it was, just scattered all over the place, and there'd be a couple laughing, findish little neighborhood kids, So he decided they had to solve the problem. And the approach he took was he waited next to the can, and when he saw the kids come by, he offered them $1 to knock the can down, or it might have been $5. He offered them enough money to make it worth their while to knock the can over. And he did this every single time over the course of maybe a month, maybe 2 months, and then one day when the kids come on by to knock the can over and make their $5, he said, "Nah, I'm not going to pay you anymore." And the kids said, "Well, if you're not going to pay us, we're not going to knock your can over." And there you have a parable for the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Now, my introduction to this sort of concept came from education. I noticed that all through school I read books because I wanted to, and then I was forced to do schoolwork. I don't really remember much of the schoolwork that I did, but I remember everything that I read because I wanted to. And over the course of the last couple of years, I was asking a lot of other people who are involved in many ways, a much more challenging task than finishing high school, the task of trying to learn a language, the task of trying to take a language that they would consider to be theirs, or that, specifically the Cree language, Nehiyawe, and they talked to me, and I asked them questions about what helped them, what made the language possible for them to learn, and what made it impossible. And over again, both the teachers and the students all would, in one way or another, express the idea that in order for them to succeed, the learning process had to belong to them. That they had to be the ones who were motivating them to go and learn the language. It couldn't be that they were learning the language because their teacher told them to. They wouldn't have success if they were learning the language just in order to get a good grade. The only way to do it was to have the motivation come from within you. And this leads into the next story, which is one that David introduced me to. The story of Angel. Now, this might be kind of an interesting type of a story to bring into this podcast, but as we said in our blog, I won't say a lot, but there's certain aspects of popular culture that are real fascinating.
I call this geek culture.
Geek culture. That's true.
Yes.
That's probably a better term, actually.
The wonderful Joss Whedon.
Yes, and the god of the geeks is Joss Whedon.
I don't know if I call him God, but yes,
yeah, he does hold a certain place of reverence.
But yeah, he's famous for
Firefly,
Buffy the Vampire Slayer is the one a lot of people know.
Mm-hmm.
And spun off of Buffy the Vampire Slayer is the show Angel, which is fascinating for the way it takes up this questions of good and evil and what our role is in that.
Mm-hmm.
So Angel is a vampire, and they're supposed to be bad guys. When you become a vampire, you lose your soul.
Not a shiny vampire.
No, none of those. Yeah, they're the villains. But when you become a vampire, you lose your soul within the Buffy mythology. And so vampires have no conscience. They do evil because for whatever reason. And Angel was one of the worst until he ticked off the wrong people and they cursed him and he got his soul back. And this is where, I mean, it becomes very existential at this point because he then has a conscience, he then has remorse for what he's done, and he sets out to change that.
Now, the way in which he changes it,
maybe not to change it. He sets out to atone for what he's done.
Mm-hmm. And in the process of atoning for what he's done, I don't know exactly how he encounters this, but he comes across a prophecy.
Yeah, well, Angel picks up when he leaves. He starts out in Buffy, and he ends up leaving and going to L.A. And yeah, somewhere early on this series, he sets up basically a private detective agency, and he sets out to help people. You know, he fights monsters basically, but sets out to help people. And in the course of doing this, he finds out about this prophecy. I don't remember what it's called, but that prophesies that the vampire with a soul, basically, if they do enough good, they will one day get their humanity back. And so because he's still a vampire, he's still cursed with this basically sinful nature, in spite of having a soul, and this causes him no end of grief. So there's this prophecy, that if he can do enough good deeds, basically, he can atone for his sins, and he can be restored to humanity, and then he can be with Buffy for ever and ever, and
they'll all live happily ever after. And
I should keep explaining this.
Okay, you keep explaining this one then.
He sets out on this, and he starts out doing good, and as he does this, he becomes aware of this larger entity, Wolfram and Hart, that is basically responsible. They're the driving force behind the evil in L.A. And so then he sets out to take them down, because if he can get to the root of the problem, he can fix it, and he can wipe, basically remove evil from L.A. And the problem is, in the course of this, in the pursuit of that goal, he starts to give up everything he ever valued. He has friends that have fought with him for quite some time since he's moved to LA, and they've helped him. He's made friends along the way, and he turns his back on them, and he begins to do things that are really unconscionable.
But he does them all in the service of this goal, in the service of the larger good, which he believes he must, it's morally what he has to do in order to achieve salvation.
So in order to eradicate evil and to achieve salvation, he resorts to evil. Yeah, so he gives up everything to accomplish this greater good. And that's really what it is. It's in the pursuit of the greater good. He almost sells his soul again.
Mm-hmm.
And so it picks up this episode where he finally realizes that he hits bottom, and he starts putting everything back together.
I mean, he does fully commit to this, and when it's done, when his commitment, when he's run the full course,
right. When he's run the full course, he gets to Wolfram and Hart, and he goes after one of the heads, and gets access to the magic elevator, literally, that is going to take him to Wolfram and Hart headquarters. And he gets on it and rides it, and it brings him back to Earth. And he realizes there is no great out there that he can go to and end the evil. The evil is what's done on Earth, and it comes from Earth. And so then he hits bottom, and he despairs because he realizes he can never undo the evil because he's part of it. He's contributed to it. And from there he sets out to rebuild his family, reconnect with his friends, and yeah.
In the process of doing this, he meets up with one of the friends that he in some ways had hurt the most, or it's a difficult decision, definitely abandoned, and they have a conversation about how he now views the world, having hit the bottom and come back. And we're just going to play a clip from it right now.
I feel like such an idiot.
Why?
lot of that going around.
I just couldn't... My whole life has been about being a cop. If I'm not a part of the force, it's like nothing I do means anything.
It doesn't.
Doesn't what?
Mean anything. In the greater scheme, in the big picture, nothing we do matters. There's no grand plan, no big win.
You seem kind of chipper about that.
Well, I guess I kind of worked it out. If there's no great, glorious end to all this, if nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do. Because that's all there is. What we do now, today. I fought for so long for redemption, for a reward. Finally, just to beat the other guy, but I never got it.
Now you do?
Not all of it. All I want to do is help. I want to help because I don't think people should suffer as they do. Because if there's no bigger meaning than the smallest act of kindness, it's the greatest thing in the world.
Yikes, it sounds like you've had an epiphany.
I keep saying that, but nobody's listening.
Well, I'm pretty much convinced. Since I'm alive to be convinced.
You know, you don't have to be a cop to
I'm
be...
okay. Anyway, I'm not headed towards another pillathon. I'm very grateful. I never thought you'd come for me, but I got cut a huge break, and I believe. I don't know what I believe, but I have faith. I think maybe we're not alone in this.
Why?
Because I never invited you in.
That one statement that Angel made, the one that we really want to hone in on, the first one, is the idea that if nothing we do matters, all that matters is what we do.
So I guess I should talk about where I come at this from, now that I've talked a whole lot already.
And there's a lot more.
What's
in that
interesting
book
to me
as well.
about that statement is this question of how do we live together. And I think this is very relevant in terms of Christianity, but in terms of also interfaith relations. And how do we live together? And really, what are the practices that are going to help us to survive? So he gets to, if nothing we do matters, all that matters is what we do. And I think about this primarily, I guess, or serve as my touchstone anyways, in terms of the Inquisition, the Crusades, and this sense in Christian history where if our goals are good, you know, we're in pursuit of the kingdom of God, it doesn't matter what we do.
The kingdom of heaven.
The kingdom of heaven, yeah. It doesn't matter what we do. And so we can burn people alive to save their immortal souls, and we can slaughter thousands to, you know, save them from their infidelity, or to restore the Holy Land, or whatever your goal is. I mean, in some ways we see this with the U.S. recently with the Gulf War. You know, it doesn't matter what we do if it's in the name of democracy. We can go over and we can send a country into chaos.
I guess I come from this from a different perspective. The question of what it means to be saved, or the concept of once saved, always saved, or grace. What first led me into this discussion of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation in this context of if nothing we do matters, all that matters is what we do, was the idea that if God has saved us from our sins, then does it matter what we do?
Yes.
See, which is
true. Yeah, New Covenant theology I ran across recently, which apparently is not very mainstream, but there's the argument that, you know, you take Paul to an extreme edge, and, well, since we're under grace, yeah, the Ten Commandments are obsolete. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, by some literal reading, yeah, it doesn't matter if we kill, it doesn't matter if we steal, it doesn't matter if we commit adultery, because God will save us, and what we do has nothing to do with our faith.
Mm-hmm. And And if you operate under a certain view of God, the idea where God is something like the powers that be that are going to grant angels salvation in return for his goodness, the way he has constructed or conceived of them to be, then when Jesus came and, as the narrative goes, he freed us from the sins and freed us from those obligations, the response seems to be that without those obligations, there is no longer any relationship between me and them that imposes morality or gives a basis for morality if my morality has been based off of that relationship between me and a list of obligations that I am pursuing in order to achieve my goal of salvation. So within that view of God, the meaning of being set free from sin or set free from the law seems very, well, it seems very like it cuts you loose. So the question is, how do you know, which is why when I looked at this before, I thought, well, obviously we can't really be cut loose because we still believe that you have to be good, and you have to, it's still important what we do. Therefore, maybe we're not really cut loose, which then leads to the idea of salvation through works, or legalism. And so this whole question of, all these accusations, for example, that Adventists are often accused of being legalistic, is tied up with this question.
Yeah. What is the relationship between what we do and some greater meaning? I guess, what was I going to say? Part of how I think of this, too, I should explain, is in terms of, Angel talks about the greater meaning. If there is no greater meaning, if nothing we do matters. One way that I guess is fairly traditional of thinking about the Christian faith is this idea that our actions are measured according to some eternal ideal.
Mm-hmm.
So that the impact, the value of my action, the value of the way I interact with the people around me, the value of the things I do in community, is only measured, the measuring of the value is only in terms of some distant standard held by an invisible God.
In other words, the relationship that morality is established upon is not between you and another person. The relationship is between you and this ideal.
Yeah, which is really, very close to what you're saying with the list of rules.
Mm-hmm.
It's a relationship not between people. And so then Christianity becomes not the faith of relationship, but the faith of idealism. I'm not even sure how to express it, but it means we're not with other people. And I find that really broken, because then I can say, and I've actually, then I can say, well, if I impact you negatively, again, what I said before, if we burn you alive, it's all good because we save your soul. And so there's no accounting for my actions. There's no...
Well, there is accounting for your actions, just not between you and me.
Yeah. Which to me ends us in a horrible place, and ends us where Angel ends. He's abandoned his friends, and he's let people be slaughtered.
That's interesting.
In pursuit of good, the greater good.
It seems that for you, all of these questions are related to how you relate to other people, and that wasn't necessarily how I came into this. I came into this thinking, what are the implications of these questions for my own personal decisions, not even without thinking about others. Like, what are the implications of this idea that if nothing I do matters, all that matters is what I do, which is why I began with the story of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So I think I'll just explain how I think through there right now, and then go back. One way of looking, when I look at salvation, I say Christ came, Jesus came, and he, you'd say that he made it clear that we were not he saved us. We believe that he saved us unconditionally. He saved us despite our sins, despite anything that we could do. Christ saved us. In other words, nothing. The way we tell the story of salvation, especially within the context of the Great Controversy, which we don't really have to get into a whole lot right now, especially within that context, we say that what he did is he completely destroyed any connection between what we do and the concept of reward or punishment.
Which is to say, nothing we do matters.
Mm-hmm. And in doing that, he gave me the opportunity to he took away the idea of extrinsic motivation for righteousness. In other words,
Performance.
up until I understood that salvation meant that nothing that I did matters, the underlying motivation is, especially if I had been crazy enough to actually apply it to my life, would have been, I am treating you kindly. I am your friend because I'm told to, and the decision would not be mine. My approach to this comes from my interest in a lot of the work of Jean-Paul Sartre.
If I can interject,
existentialism. Yes.
I mean, this almost goes. This brings up the question of the Holocaust actually very directly with the famous defense of, well, we were following orders.
Mm-hmm.
Because and that, I mean, some of that's my perspective, but it's the idea that, yeah, what I do is not my choice. It's what I'm told to do. And so then all that matters is that I follow orders. It doesn't matter what the impact of that is. If I slaughter thousands or millions or whatever, if I slaughter all these people, it doesn't matter because I'm following orders. I'm doing what is, and following orders is what is good.
Well, in some response, if we create a religion that allows for a person to view their decisions in the context of, I am doing what God wants me to do, we're training people with a mindset that could let them to be moved into a new context, for example, the military, to where they are also, even in that context, willing to give their morality over to a higher power, except in this case it would be the military leadership rather than God.
Yeah. And this is sort of the idea of responsibility I talked about in my thesis. But anyways,
so in other words,
Jean-Paul Sartre.
Yeah, well, Jean-Paul Sartre talks about the concept of existentialism, which in its, as I understand it in its base form, says that we are only, life is made meaningful through decisions, and decisions are made meaningful when we make them. A decision that I allow somebody else to make for me is not meaningful for me. It's only meaningful to the person who makes me make them.
Who makes the decision.
Who actually makes the decision. And the extent to which I take responsibility for my decisions, for my actions, is the extent to which life is meaningful. And to which I can be said to be living at all. For example, if I'm going to, if somebody wants my opinion on somebody else, if I allow, my opinion holds no weight if I'm allowing somebody else to dictate that opinion for me. They might as well not ask me. They might as well just go ask the person who's dictating. If I'm going to be a witness in a trial, and I'm not speaking on my own, I'm simply, if there's going to be a debate over which course of action is better, and I choose a certain course of action, my choice of that course of action is only significant if I'm the one who made it. It loses all significance if I'm doing it because somebody told me to do it.
Yeah.
And it becomes only significance in terms of what they did, of the person who directed me. So when I look at this question of existentialism, I realize that not only within this frame, being cut loose from this relationship between me and Allah gives my life meaning.
So if nothing you do matters, then all that matters is what you do.
Yeah, and to another extent is that literally nothing would matter unless all that mattered was what I did.
Yeah.
It's only by being put in this situation where nothing matter, where things do not matter because of their relationship to an external force, that I can actually make meaningful decisions internally.
Yeah.
And going back to the idea again of the necessity of having intrinsic motivation to actually succeed, you end up with a situation where very practically, unless you take the approach that I'm doing this because of what I want to do. I'm following God because that is the desire of my heart. I'm not following God because He tells me to, or because I must do it in order to avoid being punished. It is only when I do it as my decision, which it's kind of twisted when you look at the idea how we need the power of Christ to help us, but I think this still works in here somewhere. It's only when I'm not doing it under threat of reward or punishment that I have any hope of not succeeding, so to speak, but you'll get a lot further in living that life when it's coming out of you. And so this led me to, I guess I'll just finish up quickly here, all these questions of existentialism and the question of if nothing I do matters, all that matters is what I do, led me to really develop the concept of taking responsibility for myself. And it didn't really lead me to the discussion of community until I was talking to you yesterday, when you all of a sudden made me realize that was the whole point.
And that's so funny. I think that's what's so interesting with this, is this does invoke, in some ways, connect so broadly and differently for both of us. That's part of what we're trying to explain this, and hopefully you're getting a bit of a grasp of how many things this connects to in our thinking. So if you ever hear us say it, which we often do, it'll make sense. So for me, like I said, there's this question community that's so central. Again, if nothing we do matters, all that matters is what we do. And I love what he says after that. If there is no greater meaning, then the smallest act of kindness is the greatest thing in the world. Because of, that's a hard one to explain, but because of what it does for the world. Because if the measure of an event is the personal impact and the community impact rather than what God thinks about it, which is not to say that's not important, but if the real measure of it is how it impacts the people around you, then what really matters is the smallest act of kindness, because that can change the world. And this is something we've actually run across in a few different podcasts, where you're often, well, what do we do about this? And I'm always like, well, you have to take personal responsibility, and you have to act, I haven't said it quite like this, but basically act locally. Act on the people that are nearest you and do what you can for them, because if you change them, they can go on to change others, and that's building the world you want. A clear way to say this actually is from the anime Fate Zero. There's this wonderful moment at the end where the hero finally achieves what he's been seeking, and his goal has been to have peace, the end of war. But he's set out to do this as an assassin. He's always killed the people that would bring evil into the world. He's always just removed them from the equation in order to save the others. And he gets this point, and he gets what he wants, and he's talking to the force that's going to grant him his wish, I guess. And he says, all I wish for is peace. And this voice that he's speaking with tells him, if you wish to change the world, it can only be accomplished by ways you understand. And so the only way, because he's always been a killer, that's the only way peace could ever come for him. Because otherwise he wouldn't even recognize it. It would be something other than who he is and what he's done. And it's this break for him that he would kill everyone. And that's how it goes. There's 500 people or there's 1,000 people, or 900 people, 400 on one boat, 500 on another boat. Both, you can only save one. Which boat do you save? Okay, well, you save the 500. But then the people on the boat with 400 kidnap you. And so his answer is, well, I kill them all to save the 400. And then they have to split, and there's 300 and 200. And the same thing happens, and well, he kills the 200 to save the 300. And this goes all the way down until everybody's dead. Because that's the only way he can conceive peace. And in opposition to that, then, the smallest act of kindness is the greatest thing in the world. If that makes sense.
Oh, it does make... I just realized that the idea that... the way I look at it leads in the direction of committing to a greater level of involvement with those around me, with the world around me, and with everything.
Mm-hmm.
The implication is that if all that matters is what I do, then everything that I do matters, and the way that I make it matter more is to become more deeply aware of it.
And maybe more consistent, too.
Mm-hmm.
And not in the sense of always doing exactly the same action, but in being deliberate
in deliberateness.
about, if this is the world I want, this is how I'm going to make it.
Mm-hmm. And this ties into how I view myself as, say, a calm individual.
Let's not go there.
Yeah, but I'll say it does, because when I use the word calm, I think I also mean deliberate.
Okay.
With this story underlying
I'm
that.
deliberate, and I'm not necessarily calm.
Yeah, but that's how I view myself. Anyways, I'll say that. And it also relies into what I'll be talking about later when we start talking about the impact of nature on us again, or my approach to interaction with nature is attempting to know more about it so that my decisions matter more when I'm there.
Well, this ties into wayfaring, which we've talked about before.
Yeah,
and that it's a way of living in the world.
Now, I guess what I want to take us back to is the idea of relationships. How does this change our relationship with those around us, and how does this change our relationship within an organization?
Well,
how does it change the focus?
What I was thinking about is, by way of analogy, thinking of a romantic relationship. I mean, because it's a great way to break it down. There's the traditional sort of approach we talk. We hear about notches on the belt, the conquest mentality, where the meaning of your interactions with the individual is not ever about the individual, but about the conquest, about the greater meaning at the end. And so then you do whatever it takes. If you have to lie, if you have to, manipulate, or whatever you have to do, as long as it gets you to the end goal, it's good.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, it doesn't get you past that. It gets to the end goal, and that's it. And that's not a relationship. A relationship with someone is built in those individual actions. And yes, they may eventually lead to, sex or marriage or marriage, or wherever. They may lead to some greater consummation of the relationship. But even then, that's not the end. That then becomes another step, because the relationship is in the individual moments, in the individual interactions, in the way you actually interact.
So the question, I was looking at this and I was saying, well, what does this say about my responsibility within a relationship and who I'm responsible to? So I guess we approach this from very different perspectives.
I don't get that question, because I'm like, you're responsible to everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
And especially the ones you choose to be responsible to. But, at some point you are responsible to everyone. Yeah,
well, exactly. But this is contrasting with the view, this is completely opposite of if you view your position within a community as one of being a hierarchical organization.
Oh, yeah.
See, because in that case, if, say, I'm a member of... What am I a member of? I'm not really a member of much, but say I'm a member of something.
If Dale belonged.
if I belonged to Amway. No, I won't pick on that.
Anyways.
Yeah.
Some fictional hierarchical organization.
Yeah, but there are...
The Illuminati.
There are a lot of structures which are very distinctly hierarchical, and I've worked in institutions which were structured like this. Okay, I can say that. I've worked in institutions that were structured like this, where my responsibility to my work was not a function of my responsibility to those I was working with. My responsibility for work was tied up with my responsibility to my immediate superior.
Oh.
And as a result, the relationship that I had with others around me was also tied in. The way in which I evaluated those relationships was, by definition of my job, the result not of a responsibility between me and them, but a responsibility between me and my employer.
Well, that's interesting. I get into a lot of trouble in jobs because I never approach it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I figure the last person I'm responsible to is my employer. But
yeah, and so to me,
you don't always like that.
The idea that all that matters, and this is a fact of life, is that I do have responsibilities to my employer, because they, not just because that's the way the system works, but also because they give me that responsibility and I accept it. So I step into this system of responsibility, almost to the point where I would say I was following orders, which is still something I have to mediate and think about when I'm in these situations. But the question I ask myself then is, if we are to view the world in the ways which we're trying to conceive of it, in where any relationships we have is not between us and an external power, that is
Authority.
dictating an external
This is-
authority. So, our relationship between us and God is not one of us with authority, but us with an individual who loves us. This seems to me to be a model of a relationship between me and those around me. And if I were to structure or to create an organization to manage such a situation, the organization would be very different from the traditional Western type of a organization, or the type. And this leads back to
This fits so well with the ending of the episode, which
Mhm.
I mean, the section the clip we shared was almost the end. But after this, Angel goes back. Okay, so we said he started this detective agency basically, and he's working with 3 friends. And when he started to do really terrible things in the name of his greater good, they called him on it, and he said, "Well, I don't need you," and fired them all. And so the end of the episode, he returns to them. He's just saved their lives. And he goes back to them and he says, when he comes in, they're like, "Well, Angel, we talked and we're not ready." And he's like, "No, I want to work for you." Because he was always the boss. He was always the one calling the shots. And he comes back and he says, "No, I want to work for you because I think I can help." And that's it. And it's just what you're talking about. It's it's just the undermining of that relationship where it shifts from authority to, we talk about servanthood. It's a very sort of cliched Christian phrase, the servant leader. But that's what he becomes. That what he does then is meaningful, not because he's in control and exerting his will in some potent, powerful way, but in that he's helping.
No.
And in that he's in this relationship.
How often do we conceive of the role as a servant within our organization, as a church, as still being a role of authority? Well, he's a servant, therefore.
The authority doesn't matter.
I know, but it still gets seen. Now this,
but yeah.
Now, this question of what a society built upon, built sideways rather than hierarchical, is one that I ended up talking about yesterday with a guy from Native Studies Department, who's been looking at. He's trying to study and understand. He was studying Métis history, which, as you've mentioned, I always go back to. But
Yes,
he was
quite a lot.
He was looking at government and trying to understand Métis government, and he said it's very difficult because all the way back, historians say, "Oh, they didn't have government." Even our leaders say, "Well, we don't really have government," or "We don't really have," and it's such a strong statement. And he says, "But that's not the case. We were very much governed, except it was a different type of government. It was a government that was based off of our relationships with each other. In other words, it was a government that was structured sideways and not hierarchically." I didn't paint this as such a clear-cut contrast, but it does give me the sense where I look at this statement and my this understanding of what my relationship is between me and God, between me and morality, and I construct the meaning of my actions as between me and those around me, to where I find myself being a Christian anarchist. Not to the extent that
Jacques Ellul will be proud.
Yeah. Not to the extent where I say we no longer have to have rules and we no longer have to have government in order to organize our nature, but the conceptualization of government that has come out of the hierarchical view of authority and of God is completely contrary to the way in which I would like to see the community that I belong in governed. Yeah. In other words, I feel compelled to build my system of relationships with those around me completely outside that structure of government.
Yeah, I think we're about done. There's a couple things I want to throw in. This idea, you'll also we can do some more podcasts talking about dualism.
Mm-hmm.
You'll hear that again, and I'll talk about that some, and we'll explore that. But this ties into that. This idea that the world can be divided into, matter. In one way of doing it is body and soul, or matter and essence and existence. There's a bunch of different divides. But basically the idea that what is really real about the world and what is really real about us is not what we can see and touch and feel. It's not our experiences. It's this mystical, airy something off in another dimension or whatever. And this is definitely a challenge to that. And I think it's a good challenge. It's good that the challenge is being made. this also heads in the direction of, I mean, and some of that's tied up in the postmodern critique, is the idea that we have to start talking about bodies again. And this will make some Christians very uncomfortable, because if nothing we do matters, then we can just do anything, and that's absolutely not the point. And if nothing we do matters, well, then it doesn't matter what we believe. It doesn't matter. There is no God, and that was something I find very interesting in this exchange. Is faith is never at issue in this. They have, Kate and Angel have this exchange, and he says, nothing we do matters. There is no great story. There is no great meaning to it all. But then Kate says, but I have faith. I believe. And she says, I believe because I didn't invite you in. And we should explain that. Within Buffy lore, a vampire cannot enter your house unless they are invited in. And Angel, she's tried to commit suicide early in the episode, and she calls Angel, and he rushes over there, and he goes right into the house and saves her. And there's no reason that should have happened. He shouldn't have been able to enter, and yet he could. And so the question remains open, even with all this discussion, even with the idea that what we do is not valuable because of some great, weigh scale in the sky. But there's still room for interaction, and it's a very different kind of God. I mean, this is God as other that we've talked about, and we'll probably continue to explore.
I guess, in other words, when Angel says that he rejects the great conclusion or the great end that he is seeking, it's the rejection of the one that he was seeking, and not necessarily the rejection of there being something else. It just, he realizes that the way in which he conceived that something else, was flawed.
Yeah, led him to do really terrible things. Mm-hmm. And that's something worth wrestling with. I think that's a good place to stop.
Oh, I think so. It seems like we've gotten so, I don't know, not dark, but so serious.
That's okay.
Why so serious, Batman?
But we should end.
All right, we'll stop there.
So this has been a Story in Life podcast. If you found this online somewhere, you can find our website at taanshi.blogspot.ca.
That's TAANSHI, and I like 2 A's in the, sets it apart and makes it a long vowel, which is always important.
Anyways, so thank you for listening. I guess probably after this we're going to be talking about the conference we were just at. We do some podcasts on that, and then we'll see what happens after that.
Over and out.